I think it's a fantastic day here in Hastings, and the sun's out, and that looks superb. It's always interesting to capture renewable energy, so perhaps to start off with, we can perhaps switch the lights out and do our bit. Is it possible to switch those out? We've got blue lights here. No? We've got about 2 kilowatts of lighting over our head, and I think it's actually contributing nothing to today, is it? Have we agreed on that? It's really very, very little. But it does show you that energy and carbon management is around us every day. I think each and every one of us can do an awful lot to save energy, save carbon, and it's not too difficult. People say switch the lights out and it saves energy, but actually it's about capturing the renewable energy, and it makes a much bigger impact by saying things like that. It's always in the wrong place though, isn't it? So I'm very pleased to be here, and I think I've worked in energy and carbon management for the last 30 years, and the starting point was the 73 and 79 oil crisis, when I think we all woke up to the fact that across the globe we are held to ransom on oil in terms of production and in terms of its distribution, and that continues to today without any doubt. And the petrol pumps closing down, and people not being able to get petrol brings the whole economy to a close, and I think we learned from that. The net result of that, though, was during the 1980s, we invested strongly in oil rigs, and no more here than in the UK, where the North Sea oil rigs went up very, very quickly, and it solved the problem in a short-term crisis, and we forgot about depleting fossil fuels because it wasn't a concern to us, and we can forget about it, and it goes away. The problem is that 70% of those oil rigs put up during the 80s are now in declining yield, and we're all becoming importers of oil from other countries, and we've forgotten to continue to invest in that infrastructure, and we're perhaps waking up to that. Waking up to that because across the globe, the developing countries are moving forward at a rapid pace, increasing their consumption of oil, and we've got a real problem where the consumption, if it wasn't for the recession, the consumption would be driving up prices hugely. I think during the 1990s, the climate change came about. Now, the greenhouse gases and global warming had been talked about since the 70s and before. The science of that is well established and has been well established for many, many decades. But during the 90s, people started to see things happening. People were concerned about what's happening to the environment. We've seen major changes. That has financial crisis. It brings in financial problems. It also brings in problems for everyday working life. And people started to get concerned that the greenhouse gases, climate change is real. And I think that's been a major change over the last decade, the realisation of that at an individual personal level, and then that drives politicians and EU to act on these things, which has been so positive. More recently, over the last 5 years, I think we've seen the real problem in the energy gap, in that our production of oil is not meeting requirements. Energy prices are then pushed up, strong volatility of energy prices, and of course this focuses the mind as well. So at the present moment in time, perhaps over the last few years, we've seen concern over depleting fossil fuels, concern over energy prices, and concern over climate change, and that, without any doubt, places this issue as the most important issue facing mankind at the present moment in time. And that's where I place it, and I think that's where most people are considering it should be. Depleting fossil fuels, well, we're probably 50% through our fossil fuels. That's the reality of it. The reality of it, the first commercial motor car came out about 110 years ago. So in a relatively short space of time, we're through half the fossil fuels. You can look at it in lots of ways. You can say we can get more gas from shale and all the rest of it. Of course we can. But it's more expensive, it's harder to get, and at the end of the day we are still guzzling through those fossil fuels at a rapid rate, something that is unsustainable, something that we need to act in, and the fact that EU and this sort of project and everybody here today is recognising that is a very important issue and sends a sign of hope against a problem that's going to be extremely difficult to solve across our community. The climate change issues, I don't want to dwell too much on it, but flooding is probably the most extreme example. Our climate here in the UK has changed quite drastically. Heating doesn't have to go on now on the 1st of October generally. People are pushing it off until October, November. Our seasons are certainly changing. I didn't put my personal heating system on until Christmas Day, under a lot of pressure on the 25th of December. It went on, but it is amazing what can be achieved. So do think about pushing those boundaries. At the same time, it can be quite. We went to shut down heating on the 1st of May, and actually that was quite hard this year, and it has been quite hard for the last few years. There's been a bit of chilly snap, and it's been changing. The ecosystem has been changing. Plants are often getting frostbite and coming out early, and causing lots of problems. So it's worth thinking about the way it's changing. But it costs money. Large flooding, Dresden train station underwater, large-scale flooding across all of European countries. It's costing a lot of money now, and we need to act on this and think about it further. And the Stern report that came out was a real guidance on this, and it's not only initial evident change in climate change, but thinking a little bit long term. If we don't do something about this and do something very quickly and reduce our temperature rise in the atmosphere to 2 degrees centigrade, it is going to become a huge problem and take a huge amount of finance, perhaps in 20, 30, 40, 50 years' time, to solve. And so the 2066 figure is quite an interesting one, in that if we don't solve it by then, I think you're absolutely right, we've got a problem that's going to continue. And it'll start affecting our water systems, as it already is, our food chains, supply chains, etc. There will be major disruption across the globe. And as an animal on this earth, like any other animal, will we be able to adapt? We've got the fortune that we can think about this and adapt, but many other animals haven't got that option to think about it. Whether we'll think about it hard enough is another matter. The Stern report came up with something very straightforward, that we should start to spend money. 1 to 2% of our gross domestic product should be spent on solving this problem now. The sooner we do something about it, the better. Every year of delay is costly, and that's where we sit at the moment. And it's great to see projects like this and the EU funding projects like this that are exemplary and looking at particular areas. It's just worth reflecting on energy costs, and this graph shows the movement in energy costs since 2005, each line representing an individual year. The peak of energy costs came in 2008. This was pre-recession, pre the financial crisis, with the developing countries across the world increasing their consumption of oil, and clearly it put us all under pressure. And the 2008 peak was the Hurricane Katrina peak, and this peaked the wholesale gas prices here in the UK, and you can see that quite clearly. You can see a movement since 2005 upward, this upward trend. This is in pence per therm, so from about 30 pence per therm we're now travelling away. And what's interesting now to look at it in 2012, which is this line here, is that it's pretty high. Considering we're in a recession and that there's been a large reduction in energy consumption across Europe and the globe, we're at a very, very high point. This is last year, and last year, uniformly across the year, was very, very stable and very, very high. In fact, last year, on average, was the highest price we've ever seen, including the 2008 year. So, despite the fact we're in the midst of recession, energy is costing us more, and that is reflective of the problem that we've got in getting energy supplies in the future, and the problem that we've got out there. If we get through the recession, then we can expect energy prices perhaps to double or more, and that will have a severe effect. So we need to do something about it. Let's just reflect on EU energy consumption, and across the 27 nations of the European Union. When you look at the energy consumption that we're using, and you convert that into barrels of oil just to get some sort of visualization of what that is, that equates to using 1.37 million barrels of oil per hour every hour of the day, and burning it for our electricity, our transport fuels, and our building fuels, etc. So it's a phenomenal amount of energy that we are consuming. It's relatively unseen. You don't see that burning of fossil fuels because we've cleaned it up. Engineers and scientists across Europe have cleaned everything up. Our power stations, you see a little bit of evaporative water coming out of the water cooling towers. Our vehicles are now totally clean, catalytic converters. You don't see smog and smoke coming out. We've cleaned up the immediate impact of that. But underneath it, underneath that science and engineering, is a huge amount of pollution that's going out. And we've just been so clever at cleaning this up. It's a little bit like buying a leg of lamb in the supermarket. You go and buy your leg of lamb, and it's great to eat for Sunday dinner, and it looks fine to eat and all the rest of it, but in the end of the day, if you had to go and get it from a field and get that little lamb, it has an impact, and you think about what you're doing a little bit more and make some thought on that. Here it's the same. We don't see the effect of this pollution at all. We don't see it. It's been cleaned up and hidden away. But the fact of the matter is it's there. Let's try and bring that pollution to realisation then. One of the great UK achievements, I think, which is the Buncefield oil disaster. This was the largest European peacetime explosion. And it's the only positive thing that comes out of this is it just shows you what the pollution looks like. This Buncefield oil disaster burned 300,000 barrels of oil in 4 days. It created a complete blot on the landscape. It's hard to see with the renewable energy coming in from the windows today, but a complete blot that shows on the UK map without any doubt that there's smoke there. And you can see this. They say from Birmingham, from the Rotunda town, you can actually see the smog over the southeast. I think the people in the north were quite happy about that. But the reality is it was a real blot. And that was 300,000 barrels of oil burnt in 4 days. Remember, the EU used 1.37 million barrels of oil an hour. So the equivalent is 435 of Buncefield oil disasters continuously across Europe. So if we place this across Europe, then you can certainly see the pollution that we're causing, and you perhaps realise why the environment is starting to creak big time. You can probably see one of these fires everywhere. So it just perhaps shows you the perspective of what we're doing when you bring it home to roost. I think reflecting on this and perhaps putting the whole thing in a picture, I think the easiest way of doing this is I used to do a lot of microbiology at university, and I used to brew beer, and I think I know some from Belgium beer is fantastic, and I used to brew beer and brew wine, and we've all done that perhaps at home, and it's really interesting. You are God. You create a environment, a microclimate for yeast to survive in. And what you do is you take a demi-joint, gallon demi-joint, you put it in a lovely sugary solution, which is the substrate, the energy for life, and you add your yeast to that. And then you let the yeast do its stuff, and it creates you some great alcohol at the end of it. It's interesting to look at that, though. You put the yeast in, and yeast have never known it so good. This is a godlike environment created for them. And they multiply like anything. Now, the yeast lifetime is about 25 minutes, just about that time. So over about 3 weeks, typically, you're going through about 1,200 lifetimes. And it's interesting to look at nature. It runs out after 1,200 lifetimes. Is there a parallel here for other things as well? Worth thinking about, isn't it? But the yeast don't know any better. They double and they multiply. Every 20 minutes they're moving on. And in the end, there's about 6 million yeast per centimetre cubed. That's what you're getting to. And they've never known it so good. Now, they don't know what's coming to them. They don't know what's coming to them. Now, there are only 2 solutions to this. One solution is that they create a lot of alcohol in this microclimate in their world. They create a lot of pollution. The alcohol is pollutant, and at about 13, 14, 15%, the yeast die off. They get poisoned, they spoil the whole environment, they get poisoned by it, and they die off and go dormant, and that is the end of the yeast. The other one is that they go through, and you haven't put enough sugar in, and what happens is they run out of substrate. They don't know it's coming. They expand hugely, and they run out of substrate, and that's the end of the yeast. So there are only 2 solutions to that. And it's an absolute parallel. Nature creates itself over and over again, and I think it's worth reflecting on that. Where are we with this? We have a substrate. We are tremendously reliant on our fossil fuels at the moment. And there's a lot of clever thinking about other ways of doing it, but we are 100% reliant on these things for the future. And we've got the choice. Are we going to do something about it? We know there's a problem. We are polluting our environment, and are we going to act on this? Or the fossil fuels will run out. And it probably will pollute the environment before they run out, potentially. So are we going to act on this? Now, the great thing about mankind is that we're intelligent beings. We're not yeast. So we can be confident we're going to act on this. We have the power of abstract thought. We know what's coming to us, and we can think ahead in all sorts of ways. But can we do that? Are we going to be solving this? There are so many options to us because of our clever thinking that we can often get lost and waylaid by the action. So powerful thought really to think about, and we can do something, and it's great to see the EU funding projects like this to act on it. Just reflecting on the 2020 vision, this graph shows the consumption of CO2 emissions across the EU 27 nations, and when they signed up to the 2020 targets, which was fantastic, this was pre-recession, and what we have seen over the last few years is the recession has dropped the consumption. It's not only the fact that there are savings going on, but there has been a huge recessionary environment across Europe. And so achieving the 2020 goals is well in hand and should be achieved. The 2020 goals are reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 20% based on the 1990 levels. Increase the renewable energy sources by 20%, which again is excellent, and then increase energy efficiency reduction by 20%. All of those are aspirational and fantastic goals. The government have also said that they will increase that target, and quite happy to increase that to 30% if there is global commitment to continue that, because they want to push on further. And so we are genuinely showing the lead across the globe, and that's important. And in the longer term, if we are going to meet the requirements of the Stern report, we do need to be thinking about very, very high-level targets, something like 80% reduction by 2050 to achieve that. So much more aspirational and challenging targets, and I think we need to move on with that across the globe as quickly as possible. Uniting the globe on this issue, the political issues there are perhaps remain perhaps the highest barrier here to act on. The recession and the landscape has changed hugely. The financial crisis that's there and bubbling along and becoming an increasing problem in Europe is huge, and there's huge stress on the European economies, and undoubtedly that's a major player. The Fukushima nuclear incident has changed the landscape on nuclear a little bit, and certainly Germany's thought on that. They are seeing renewables and perhaps not the nuclear solution being the right answer. Obviously, nuclear power does decrease your carbon footprint, although it takes a lot of energy and time to create a nuclear power station, but it is a solution and is one of the prongs that we should be using. The fact that as we come out of recession, the global markets might expand, and that we may have this energy gap, and there will be fighting over getting hold of oil, and the prices may escalate up hugely. That may be something we will see. And the opportunity for sustainability development is there. At the moment, Europe imports something like £300 billion worth of energy, so it's a big play, and there's a great opportunity to link things up. And whilst undoubtedly the financial crisis is a very urgent issue and needs to be urgently dealt with and is being thought about in lots of ways, and it's not going to be easy to solve, it is not an important issue. It is not an important issue for the future at all. It's urgent but not important. And interestingly, renewable energy, energy efficiency, does hold part of the solution for this, moving to a more sustainable future. In total contradiction to what has been happening perhaps over the last 20 years, which is dashing for fast-track finance and making money, thinking about things more sustainability has got to be the right answer for the future. It mitigates climate change. It gives us a greater security of energy supply. Spending money on renewables and energy infrastructure will generate income in the EU and stop us spending £300 billion in bringing energy in every single year. It's a great opportunity to create jobs, which is desperately needed across the EU, and good jobs that will deliver results and deliver savings, long-term savings to our nation. So I think it's a really great answer. It's a great opportunity for sustainability, and it is very much a virtuous circle. This will work extremely well. Trying to get this on the agenda and move it forward is the key issue, but the opportunities are absolutely huge. Whilst there's some great thinking, and undoubtedly this project will bring different ideas to the table, interesting collaboration across the countries, and there are some great examples across Europe that can be shared. In the end of the day, the low carbon agenda is not easy, not difficult to achieve. It's just a matter of getting action, and we've already got some action on the lines here. How do we get everyone to think about everything around them, and that change in emphasis that we need, that cultural change that we need across the whole of Europe. But certainly 10% savings can be delivered just by a little bit of clever thinking. It is as simple as that. So we all need to just get a bit clever about this and get this on the agenda. The technical issues that can go ahead are absolutely superb. There's been a lot of work on this, and I'll talk about a few of those, but it isn't difficult to provide technical solutions to substantially reduce your carbon footprint across all of our industries, all of our commercial and all of our domestic houses. That is not difficult to achieve. And so there's another 20% there, so you've got a 30% saving potential that's just sitting on us ready, waiting to act. Just needs investment, job creation to do something about it. The next area which is interesting is the design of our buildings, and again this project will work partly on that. Refurbishing them, economic refurbishments of those buildings, rationalisation, more flexible use of our properties and buildings so that they are multi-use and rationalising down. There's a good potential there of perhaps a further 10% certainly, and much of that is happening within the government sector at the moment here in the UK. And then clearly you've got all the renewable opportunities on top of this. Slightly longer paybacks, needs a little bit more commitment, but certainly all very well established PV, solar water heating, biomass boilers, all of these types of things very much established in Europe and can certainly increasingly becoming established in the UK. It isn't difficult to see that we are perhaps 40, 50, 60% is there. We have the ability to do it. We just need the wherewithal to act and the leadership and guidance to move forward. There are also some interesting parallels and good news stories across the European nations. This shows the EU emissions per kilowatt hour, kilograms of carbon per kilowatt hour for electricity and heat. And major countries such as Sweden, France, Finland coming in quite low there, are showing that their kilograms of carbon dioxide are extremely low because perhaps nuclear, maybe because of very heavily insulated buildings and a lot of renewable power being used as well. So it can be done. This decarbonising of the grids is there and is possible and is happening, and we just need to expand our practices. There's nothing rocket science here. There's nothing new to this. It is happening and happening very well. In terms of the general low carbon technologies that are out there, LED lighting is perhaps at its prominence and ready to go. 5 years ago, LED lighting was in its infancy. It's now ready to be rolled out across Europe and really should be the future of all lighting near enough. As it goes through, there are a few examples we can't use LED lighting. For the majority of lighting, you can change to LED. And we're talking about tremendous savings by putting in LED technology. At the moment, we have these 50-watt tungsten halogen spots that are listed everywhere throughout the UK and all of our houses, and they can quite simply be changed for a 5-watt version, giving out as good a light that's controllable and even dimmable now, LEDs on these things. So the technologies are there, the fluorescent technologies are there, the technologies for our warehouses and our factories are there in LED. So this will be a major opportunity for business and for job creation in rolling that out across the globe. Also, the sustainability on LED is fantastic. The fact that these lamps last 30, 40, 50,000 hours is superb, and that means that in terms of changing these bulbs every 1,000 hours, I'm sure there's a few missing, perhaps gone down in this room today. The reality is there'll be a bulb every day, every week that will need changing in this room. That's the reality if they're only lasting that number of hours. So, straightforward opportunities. IT, the energy consumption IT has dropped hugely. We're now increasingly using laptops and other methods to reduce our consumption. We used to design our buildings on 250 watts of IT per person, and we're now down to 50 watts. So that's a huge change over the last 20 years. A flat screen, 22-inch flat screen, now is down to about 16 watts instead of the CRT, cathode ray tube, at about 100 watts. Huge changes. And of course that then has implication on air conditioning. If our lighting has gone down by 80% and if our IT consumption has gone down so substantially, do we need so much air conditioning in our buildings? No, we don't. The majority of our buildings can be naturally ventilated or cooled by clever cooling systems, backwardated cooling systems, whatever way you want to do it, but you don't need to use so much refrigeration. You just need to keep a bit of the sunlight out. So there's huge changes there. And then you've got the renewable technologies, biomass, combined heat and power, heat recovery from one industrial site or one industrial building to the next, all good opportunities here. And these can have a huge impact. And I mean, that would be an interesting part from this study of industrial sites, the linking together of buildings in heat networks, so that you can start to use combined heat and power, you can start to use biomass a lot easier, you can start to capture renewable energy from wind and PV and distribute it effectively on a local network. All of these things are extremely powerful. So I hope that puts the project in context. I mean, I think the EU are still moving forward. It's fantastic to have the EU as an overarching parallel to invest in projects like this at these difficult times. It is fantastic that they are doing that. It shows the commitment to the environment that perhaps still stays as a lead to the globe. And it's important that we don't let the problem of the financial crisis sidetrack us off what has got to be for the future. The future has got to be that we move to renewable energy in the long term. We've got to be able to look after the sun's energy and not to rely on fossil fuels. And there's a big move to that position. But that has got to be. It doesn't matter what low carbon scenarios are built up in the meantime on a slow moving to natural gas as a more to shales is a short-term solution. It's still reliant on fossil fuels. We have got to move to renewable energy, and so that we're capturing the sun's energy and being reliant on that. And we've also got to look at the overpopulation issue, which has an impact as well, of course. There are a number of issues here that come together to be solved. So thank you for listening. Thank you.